The HOA citation taped to my front door on that Tuesday morning looked official enough to make my coffee taste bitter, and I hadn't even taken a sip yet. I stood there in my bathrobe, staring at the neatly printed words that informed me I had violated Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association bylaws by installing an unauthorized outdoor fixture without prior approval. The unauthorized fixture in question: a simple clothesline I'd strung up between two posts in my backyard 3 days ago. I'm Oliver Everett, and I'd moved to this subdivision in Henderson, Nevada about 8 months prior. The houses were nice enough. Cookie-cutter Spanish-style homes with beige stucco and terracotta roof tiles that all looked vaguely the same. I'd gotten a decent price on the place after my divorce, and at the time, the HOA seemed like a minor inconvenience rather than the thorn in my side it was rapidly becoming. The fine was $250, payable within 14 days, with an additional $50 per day if I didn't remove the offending clothesline immediately. I crumpled the paper in my fist and walked back inside, slamming the door harder than necessary. My neighbor's cat scattered from my front step. I'd installed the clothesline for a simple reason. My dryer had broken, and the repair guy couldn't come out for another 2 weeks. I wasn't about to spend money at a laundromat when I had a perfectly good backyard and the Nevada sun bearing down at 95 degrees. It seemed like common sense. Apparently, common sense didn't factor into HOA regulations. The workday dragged. I'm a mechanical engineer for a solar panel company, and normally I enjoyed the technical challenges of my job. That day, though, I kept thinking about that stupid citation. During my lunch break, I pulled out my phone and downloaded the complete HOA bylaws from the Riverside Meadows website. The document was 73 pages long. 73 pages of regulations about what color you could paint your front door, how tall your grass could be, what types of plants were acceptable for landscaping, and apparently, a strict prohibition on any outdoor drying of laundry where it might be visible from the street or neighboring properties. My backyard wasn't visible from the street. You'd have to actively walk into my yard to see it, but I suppose the neighbors on either side could potentially glimpse it. The neighbor to my left was an elderly man named George who mostly kept to himself. The neighbor to my right was a young couple who both worked long hours and barely seemed to notice their own yard, much less mine. That meant someone had deliberately come onto my property or gone significantly out of their way to report me. I had a pretty good idea who. Brenda Patterson was the president of the Riverside Meadows HOA. She was 52 years old, drove a white Lexus SUV, and had the kind of blonde highlights that required monthly maintenance. I'd met her exactly twice since moving in. The first time was during the initial walkthrough when I'd bought the house, where she'd given me a glossy folder full of HOA information, and smiled with too many teeth while explaining how the association maintained property values. The second time was 3 months ago when she'd knocked on my door to inform me that my garbage cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day, which was a violation. I'd moved the garbage cans. It hadn't seemed worth arguing about at the time. This felt different. This felt personal. After work, I drove home and went straight to my backyard. The clothesline was still there, a simple cotton rope strung between 2 wooden posts I'd installed. A few of my T-shirts and a pair of jeans hung there, dry and slightly stiff from the desert air. I stood there for a long moment, arms crossed, thinking I could take it down, pay the fine. Except that this was just how things worked in an HOA community. That would be the sensible thing to do, but I'd spent the last year being sensible. I'd been sensible when my ex-wife decided she wanted to find herself, and that involved finding herself with someone who wasn't me. I'd been sensible during the divorce proceedings, letting her take most of the furniture because fighting over a couch seemed pointless. I'd been sensible when I downsized my life and moved to Henderson, starting over in a house that felt too quiet most nights. I was tired of being sensible. I went inside and started reading the HOA bylaws more carefully, all 73 pages. It took me 3 hours, a 6-pack of beer, and a significant amount of willpower not to throw my laptop across the room. But by the time I finished, I'd found something interesting. Section 12. Paragraph 8 stated that trees and natural landscaping features were encouraged throughout the community to maintain aesthetic appeal and provide shade. Section 15. Paragraph 2 specified that homeowners were responsible for the maintenance of trees on their property, but could not remove trees over 6 inches in diameter without HOA approval. And nowhere in all 73 pages was there any specific prohibition against temporarily placing items on tree branches. A slow smile spread across my face. The next morning was Saturday. I woke up early, made a strong pot of coffee, and got to work. I gathered every piece of laundry I owned: shirts, pants, socks, underwear, towels, sheets, pillowcases. I threw it all in the washing machine, running load after load. While that was going, I took stock of the trees in my yard. I had 5 trees total. 2 in the front yard, both mature desert willows with spreading branches. 3 in the back, a mix of Mexican palo verde and a surprisingly robust olive tree that had probably been planted when the development was first built. All of them had branches strong enough to support wet laundry. By noon, I'd started my campaign. I carefully draped my clothes over the branches of every tree. T-shirts hung from the desert willows in the front yard, their arms spread wide like they were greeting the neighborhood. Jeans dangled from the palo verde trees in the back. Towels adorned the olive tree. I made sure everything was secure, using clothespins where necessary to keep things from blowing away. The effect was spectacular. My yard looked like a laundry explosion had occurred. My house looked like it was being attacked by an army of colorful fabric creatures. It was ridiculous, eye-catching, and absolutely within the rules as written. I was hanging the last of my socks on a low branch of the front yard desert willow when I heard the clicking of heels on pavement. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "What do you think you're doing?" Brenda Patterson's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I turned slowly, a sock still in my hand. She stood at the edge of my driveway, perfectly put together in white capris and a coral blouse despite the heat. Her face was red and not from the sun. "Laundry," I said simply. "Good morning, Brenda. Lovely day, isn't it? This is completely unacceptable." She gestured wildly at my tree-mounted laundry display. "This violates every aesthetic standard this community stands for, does it?" I pulled out my phone, where I'd bookmarked the relevant sections of the HOA bylaws. Because I read through the regulations pretty carefully, and I don't see anything prohibiting this. Section 7, Paragraph 3 specifically mentions clotheslines and outdoor drying racks. But these aren't clotheslines. They're just clothes, on trees, which Section 12, Paragraph 8 says are encouraged natural landscaping features. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "You know perfectly well this isn't what that section means, do I?" I hung the last sock and turned to face her fully. "Because the way I read it, I'm just making temporary use of natural features on my own property. I'm not damaging the trees. I'm not installing any permanent structures. I took down the clothesline like your citation required. This is just laundry, drying naturally on trees. This is deliberate provocation." Her voice was rising now, taking on that particular pitch that suggested she was used to getting her way through sheer volume. "This is following the rules," I said calmly. "You know what is against the rules, though? Coming onto someone's property without permission to photograph or document supposed violations, which is what I assume you or someone did to see that clothesline in my backyard. That's trespassing, Brenda." Her face went from red to purple. "I have every right as HOA president to ensure compliance with community standards. You have the right to observe violations visible from common areas or the street. My backyard isn't visible from either. So someone trespassed. Was it you?" For a moment, I thought she might actually explode. Instead, she spun on her heel and marched back toward her house 3 doors down. "The board will hear about this," she shouted over her shoulder. "I'm sure they will," I called back cheerfully. My neighbor George chose that moment to emerge from his house next door. He was in his 70s, walked with a slight limp, and had the weathered look of someone who'd spent a career working outdoors. He surveyed my handiwork with an expression I couldn't quite read. "That's quite a statement," he said finally. "Had to do laundry somewhere," I replied. "Dryer's broken." George's lips twitched. "Uh-huh. Nothing to do with that citation on your door the other day. Can't imagine what you mean," he laughed, a rusty sound like he didn't use it often enough. "I've lived here for 15 years, son. Watched 3 different HOA presidents come and go. Brenda's the worst of them. She's got nothing better to do than police everyone else's lives." He paused, studying the shirts waving gently in my front yard tree. "My wife passed 2 years ago. Before that, she and Brenda used to have some real battles. Sarah would have loved this." "I'm sorry about your wife," I said. "Me too." He looked at me directly then. "But she'd want me to tell you that when you poke the bear pokes back. Brenda's not going to let this go." "I'm counting on it," I said. The rest of Saturday passed quietly. I got a few stares from people driving by, a couple of honks that might have been supportive, and one family walking past who stopped to take pictures. By evening, my laundry was dry and I brought it all inside. But I wasn't done. Sunday morning, I did more laundry. Everything I'd brought in the night before went back into the wash, along with some things I'd pulled from storage. I had a lot more clothes than I actually needed, remnants of my old life when I'd had a bigger house and a bigger closet. I strung them all back up on the trees. This time, I arranged them more artistically. I coordinated colors. I made sure the display was visible but also oddly aesthetic. From a distance, it almost looked intentional, like some kind of installation art piece. By Sunday afternoon, my doorbell started ringing. First, it was Margaret Chen from 4 houses down. She was maybe 40, worked as a nurse, and had twin boys who liked to ride their bikes up and down the street. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said when I opened the door. "Brenda fined me last month because my kids left their bikes on the front lawn overnight. $50. They're 8 years old, and she wanted me to pay $50 because they forgot to put their bikes in the garage before bed." "That seems excessive," I said. "It's tyranny," Margaret replied. "But we're all afraid to push back because she can make life miserable. Fines, citations, constant complaints. She got the Hendersons on Maple Court to sell and move away last year because she kept reporting them for every tiny thing. Their grass was a 1/4 inch too long. Their mailbox was the wrong shade of black. It never stopped. Why doesn't anyone vote her out?" Margaret laughed bitterly. "Because most people in this neighborhood are either too busy to care or they're her friends. The HOA board elections are a joke. Maybe 20% of homeowners vote, and half of those are people Brenda plays tennis with. The rest of us just try to stay off her radar." She glanced at my tree-mounted laundry. "But you're not staying off her radar." "No," I agreed. "I'm really not. She smiled. Good luck. I mean that sincerely. If you actually manage to take her down a peg, half the neighborhood will owe you a beer. Monday morning, I went to work with my laundry still decorating my trees. I'd gotten up early to make sure it was all secure, checking each piece and adding extra clothespins where needed. If Brenda wanted a fight, she was going to get one. The email arrived at 10:30 a.m. It was from the HOA board, CCing all homeowners in Riverside Meadows. The subject line read, Notice of Emergency Board Meeting Regarding Community Standards Violations. The email was professionally worded, but the intent was clear. There would be a meeting Thursday evening at the community center to discuss recent flagrant violations of community aesthetic standards and the process for addressing homeowners who deliberately circumvent the spirit of HOA regulations. My name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. I replied all to the email with a simple message. I'll be there. Looking forward to discussing how HOA bylaws should be interpreted and applied consistently to all homeowners. My phone rang 15 minutes later. The number was local but unfamiliar. Mr. Everett, this is Donald Winters. I'm on the HOA board, vice president under Brenda Patterson. Hello, Donald. What can I do for you? I was hoping we could talk, informally, off the record. His voice was measured, careful. I think there might be a way to resolve this situation without it becoming a bigger issue. I'm listening. The clothesline situation. I understand your dryer is broken. What if the HOA arranged for an expedited repair? We could have someone out there today, tomorrow at the latest, free of charge, and we could waive the fine. Clean slate. It was a smart offer. Too smart to be Donald's idea alone. This was Brenda trying to make the problem go away quietly. That's generous, I said, but it doesn't address the underlying issue, which is, the HOA bylaw prohibiting clotheslines is outdated and ridiculous. We live in Nevada. We have 300 days of sunshine a year. Air drying laundry is environmentally friendly, costs nothing, and harms no one. The only reason to prohibit it is aesthetic pearl clutching. Donald sighed. Mr. Everett, I actually agree with you. But changing HOA bylaws requires a vote, and that's a long process. In the meantime, you're creating a spectacle that's making a lot of people uncomfortable. A spectacle, I repeated. You mean laundry, on my own property, using natural features that the bylaws explicitly encourage. You know what I mean. This isn't about the letter of the law. This is about community harmony. Is it harmonious when the HOA president trespasses on private property to document violations? Because that's what happened with the original clothesline. My backyard isn't visible from the street or common areas. Someone came onto my property. There was a long pause. I don't know anything about that, but you'll look into it. I'll see what I can find out, but Mr. Everett, I'm trying to help you here. If this goes to a formal hearing, the board can impose more serious sanctions. Liens on your property, legal action. It can get ugly. Then maybe the board should reconsider their approach to enforcement. I haven't violated any bylaws. I've read all 73 pages. Twice. What I'm doing is completely within the rules as written. The board has the authority to interpret the rules and address behavior that violates the spirit of community standards. Then, I'll see you Thursday night, I said. And I'd suggest the board bring their legal counsel, because if they try to fine me for following their own bylaws to the letter, I'll be bringing mine. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking slightly. I wasn't naturally confrontational. My ex-wife used to complain that I avoided conflict too much, that I'd rather let things slide than make waves. She was probably right, but something about this situation had flipped a switch in me. Maybe it was the principle of the thing. Maybe it was just that I was tired of being pushed around. Or maybe I'd finally found something worth fighting for, even if that something was just the right to dry my laundry however I wanted on my own property. Tuesday morning brought a new development. I came out to find someone had toilet papered one of my front yard trees. White charmin hung from the branches, mixing with the blue t-shirt and green towel I'd carefully arranged there. It would have been almost funny if it wasn't clearly meant as vandalism. I called the Henderson Police non-emergency line and filed a report. The officer who came out was young, probably mid-20s, and looked like he was trying not to laugh at the situation. "So someone toilet papered your tree," Officer Ramirez said, writing in his notebook. "But you also have laundry hanging from all your trees. The laundry is intentional." "The toilet paper isn't," I said, "right? Any idea who might have done this?" "I have suspicions, but no proof. I'm having issues with my HOA president." That got his attention. HOA disputes can get nasty. You'd be surprised how many calls we get about those. Last month we had a situation where neighbors were measuring each other's grass height with rulers at 6 a.m. "Sounds about right," I said. "My advice: get some security cameras, document everything. If this escalates, you'll want evidence." He handed me a case number. "And between you and me, my parents live in an HOA community in Summerlin. They can't park their own RV in their own driveway. It's ridiculous." After he left, I drove to Best Buy and bought 2 outdoor security cameras. I spent Tuesday evening installing them, positioning them to cover both my front yard and backyard. The footage would upload to the cloud automatically. If someone wanted to mess with my property again, they'd be on camera. Wednesday was quiet. Too quiet. I went to work, came home, checked my cameras. Nothing unusual. My laundry continued hanging from every available tree branch. A few more neighbors stopped by to express support, though most of them asked me not to mention their names. They were afraid of retaliation from Brenda. One woman, an accountant named Patricia who lived 2 streets over, told me Brenda had fined her $300 last year for painting her front door burgundy instead of the approved brown. "The paint chip samples they gave me included burgundy," Patricia said. "But Brenda said it was too red. I had to repaint it and pay the fine. It cost me $800 total." The stories kept coming. A family threatened with daily fines because their teenage son's car was parked on the street instead of the driveway, even though there was no rule against street parking. A retired couple cited for having decorative rocks in their front yard that were supposedly the wrong color. A single mom fined because her kids drew hopscotch squares on their own driveway with washable chalk. Brenda Patterson wasn't just strict. She was using the HOA as a personal fiefdom to control and punish people, and everyone was too afraid or too apathetic to stop her. Thursday evening arrived. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the Riverside Meadows Community Center, a beige stucco building near the neighborhood entrance that housed a small gym, a meeting room, and a pool that was always slightly too cold. I arrived at 6:45 wearing slacks and a button-down shirt. I'd printed out copies of the HOA bylaws, highlighting the relevant sections. I'd also printed out Nevada state law regarding HOA regulations and the limits of their authority. I wasn't a lawyer, but I'd done my homework. The parking lot was surprisingly full. Apparently, this meeting had drawn interest. I recognized most of the cars as belonging to neighborhood residents. Word had spread. Inside, the meeting room was set up with a long table at the front where the HOA board members sat. Brenda was in the center, flanked by 4 other board members including Donald Winters. Rows of folding chairs faced them, and at least 40 people had shown up. That was significant in a neighborhood of 200 homes. I took a seat in the third row. Margaret Chen sat 2 rows behind me. George from next door was in the back corner. I spotted Patricia the accountant and several other people who'd stopped by my house to share their HOA horror stories. Brenda called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. She looked even more put together than usual, wearing a navy blazer and pearls. Her voice was steady and professional as she opened with standard HOA business, approving minutes from the last meeting and discussing the budget for landscape maintenance. Then she got to the main event. "We're here tonight to address a serious issue affecting our community," she began. "Recently, a homeowner has chosen to flagrantly disregard the spirit of our community standards by engaging in behavior clearly meant to mock and undermine the HOA's authority." "Point of order," I said, standing up. "Could you specify what behavior you're referring to and which bylaw it violates?" Brenda's jaw tightened. "Mr. Everett, I should have known you'd try to turn this into a circus. I'm just asking for clarity. You called an emergency meeting about my actions. I'd like to know specifically what rules I've broken." Donald Winters leaned forward. "Mr. Everett, you've hung laundry from every tree on your property in clear view of the street and neighbors. While this may technically not violate the letter of the clothesline prohibition, it violates the spirit of maintaining aesthetic community standards. Show me where the bylaws authorize the board to enforce the spirit of regulations rather than their actual text," I said. One of the other board members, a woman named Susan, spoke up. "Section 2, Paragraph 1 gives the board authority to interpret bylaws and address any behavior that negatively impacts property values or community character." I'd been ready for this. "That section gives you authority to interpret ambiguous language." "There's nothing ambiguous about what I'm doing. The bylaws prohibit clotheslines and outdoor drying racks. I don't have either. The bylaws encourage natural landscaping features like trees. I have trees. I'm temporarily placing clean laundry on tree branches on my own property. Everything I'm doing is explicitly permitted by the current bylaws. You're being deliberately obtuse." Brenda's professional demeanor was cracking. "Everyone knows what you're doing and why you're doing it." "I'm air drying my laundry because my dryer is broken," I said calmly. "If the HOA has a problem with how homeowners dry their laundry, maybe the HOA should reconsider an outdated and environmentally unfriendly prohibition on clotheslines." That got a murmur of agreement from some of the audience. Brenda noticed, and her expression darkened. "The clothesline prohibition exists to maintain property values," she said. "Studies show that visible laundry decreases home values and makes neighborhoods look lower class." "What studies?" I asked. "Can you provide citations for these studies?" "Because I found several research papers suggesting that environmentally friendly home features, including solar panels and clotheslines, actually increase property values among younger buyers who care about sustainability." I handed out copies of the articles I'd printed to the people around me. They started passing them around. Brenda looked like she wanted to snatch them away. "This meeting is not a debate club," she said sharply. "The board has the authority to issue fines for behavior that violates community standards. We are here to notify you officially that continued display of laundry on your trees will result in fines of $100 per day, starting Monday." "On what basis?" I remained standing. "What specific bylaw am I violating?" Section 2, Paragraph 1. "Behavior detrimental to property values and community character." That's a catch-all provision meant to address things like operating a business from home or raising livestock. It's not meant to prohibit normal household activities like laundry. The board has made its decision. Brenda's voice had gone cold. "You can either comply or face escalating fines and potential legal action to place a lien on your property." "Then I guess I'll see you in court," I said, "because I'm not paying fines for violating rules that don't exist. And if you try to place a lien on my property, I'll sue the HOA for harassment and selective enforcement." The room erupted. Multiple people started talking at once. Some were arguing with the board. Others were supporting me. A few were trying to ask questions about their own situations. Margaret Chen stood up. "I have a question for the board. Why is hanging laundry on trees a finnable offense, but Brenda parking her boat in her driveway for 3 weeks last summer wasn't?" That brought the room to sudden silence. "That's different," Brenda sputtered. "I was preparing it for sale, and it was only there temporarily." Section 9. Paragraph 4 prohibits recreational vehicles, boats, and trailers from being parked in driveways for more than 48 hours, Margaret continued. "I know because I got fined for having my brother's truck in my driveway for a weekend when he visited. But your boat was there for weeks. Multiple neighbors complained. Nothing happened." Donald Winters looked uncomfortable. "I wasn't aware of that situation." "Because Brenda handles most complaints directly and only brings issues to the board when she wants backup," Margaret said. "This isn't about community standards. This is about control. She targets people she doesn't like and ignores violations from her friends." Another voice from the back. "It was George, my neighbor. My wife got cited for having the wrong color rose bushes 8 years ago. 8 years. Brenda said they had to be red or pink, not yellow. Sarah had to dig them up and replant, and she just finished chemotherapy. I asked for an extension given her health situation." Brenda said rules were rules. The meeting devolved from there. More people stood up to share stories of unfair fines, selective enforcement, and Brenda's authoritarian approach to the HOA. The board members looked increasingly shell-shocked, especially when they realized how many people had grievances. Brenda tried to regain control, banging a gavel and demanding order, but it was too late. The lid had been blown off. People were angry, and they'd finally found a space to express it. After 30 minutes of chaos, Donald Winters stood up. "I think we need to table this discussion and schedule a proper community forum where everyone can voice concerns in an organized way. This emergency meeting clearly wasn't the right venue. This meeting is about Oliver Everett's violations." Brenda shouted. "Alleged violations," I corrected. "And based on what I'm hearing, the board has bigger problems than my laundry." Donald shot me a look that might have been grateful. "The board will convene privately and schedule a community forum within 2 weeks. In the meantime, no new fines will be issued pending review of enforcement policies." "You don't have the authority to override my decisions." Brenda stood up, her chair scraping loudly. "I'm the president of this board." "And I'm the vice president, and I'm calling for a vote on temporary suspension of new fines," Donald said. "All in favor." 3 of the other 4 board members raised their hands, pointedly not looking at Brenda. "Motion carries," Donald said. "This meeting is adjourned." Brenda stood there, face purple with rage as people started filing out. Several stopped to shake my hand or pat my shoulder. Margaret gave me a thumbs up. George nodded approvingly. I was almost to the door when Brenda's voice cut through the noise. "This isn't over, Mr. Everett." I turned back. She stood alone at the front of the room, the other board members having quietly escaped. For a moment, I almost felt bad for her. She looked less like a tyrant and more like someone whose entire identity had been wrapped up in a role that was crumbling around her. "It doesn't have to be a fight," I said. "We could just fix the stupid clothesline rule. Make it reasonable. Let people air dry laundry as long as it's not visible from the street. Everyone wins." People like you don't understand what it takes to maintain standards, she said bitterly. Give an inch and everyone will think they can do whatever they want. Before you know it, this place will look like a slum, or people will just live their lives without someone micromanaging every detail. But you can't stand that, can you? This isn't about property values. It's about power. Her expression twisted into something ugly. You have no idea who you're messing with. I'm beginning to get a picture, I said and walked out. That night, I slept better than I had in months. I'd stood up for myself in a room full of people. I'd called out unfairness publicly. Whatever happened next, at least I'd done that. Friday morning, I woke to my phone buzzing with notifications. Someone had created a Facebook group called Riverside Meadows HOA Reform and added me. It already had 73 members. People were sharing their own HOA horror stories, posting photos of ridiculous citations, and organizing. Margaret Chen had posted a detailed spreadsheet showing fines issued over the past 2 years, cross-referenced with board member addresses. The pattern was damning. Brenda's street had received 0 citations. Her friends' streets had minimal enforcement. Everyone else was heavily targeted. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt uneasy. The thing about poking bears, as George had warned me, is that they poke back. And Brenda Patterson struck me as someone who wouldn't go down quietly. I was right. Saturday morning, I woke to a loud knocking on my door. Opening it, I found 2 Henderson police officers standing on my porch. Oliver Everett, the older officer asked. That's me. We've received a report of vandalism in the neighborhood. Your name came up. Mind if we ask you some questions? My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. Of course. What's this about? Someone spray-painted profanity on the HOA community center last night. The HOA president says you've been engaged in an ongoing dispute with the HOA and suggested you might be involved. I was home all night, and I have security cameras that can verify that. I pulled up the camera app on my phone, showing them footage of my driveway and front door with timestamps. I installed these earlier this week after someone toilet papered my tree. The younger officer looked at the footage, then at my trees still decorated with laundry. His expression was carefully neutral. Can you send us that footage? The older officer asked. For our records. Absolutely. Can I ask what the graffiti said? Not really relevant to your statement, sir. It is if Brenda Patterson is accusing me because she's angry I challenged her at an HOA meeting. That's a false police report, and I'd like to know what I'm being accused of. The officers exchanged glances. Finally, the older one said, someone spray-painted explicit insults referring to the HOA president on the community center building. Given the timing and your public dispute, you became a person of interest. But if you have an alibi and footage showing you were home, that clears you. I want that noted in your report, I said, because this feels like retaliation for standing up to an abusive HOA president. We're just following up on a report, sir. We'll note everything you've told us. After they left, I immediately posted about the police visit in the Facebook group. The response was swift and angry. Multiple people said they'd also been visited by police over the years for various complaints that turned out to be false or exaggerated, always after disputes with Brenda. Donald Winters called me an hour later. This is getting out of hand. Did you vandalize the community center? No. And I told the police exactly where I was. Did Brenda actually tell them she thought I did it? She suggested you had motive. The police asked for suspects and she gave your name. That's filing a false report. She accused me without evidence because she's mad about the meeting. Or she genuinely thought you might be involved. Donald, be honest with me. Do you actually believe I spray painted the community center? A long pause. No. But I believe someone in this neighborhood is angry enough to do it, and this situation is escalating. We need to calm things down. Then maybe Brenda should stop harassing people. She's convinced you vandalized it. She's talking about installing cameras everywhere, hiring private security, assessing a special fee to all homeowners to cover enhanced security measures. Of course she is. She can't control the situation, so she's doubling down. I'm trying to help you here. If you just take down the laundry and no, I'm not rewarding her behavior by backing down. She's the problem, not me. I hung up before he could argue further. My hands were shaking again, but this time with anger. Brenda had actually tried to get me arrested for vandalism I didn't commit. That crossed a line from petty HOA tyranny into something more serious. I called a lawyer that afternoon. Her name was Rachel Ortega, and she specialized in HOA disputes. Her office was in Henderson, and she dealt with multiple cases involving Riverside Meadows. I know Brenda Patterson, Rachel said when I explained the situation. I've represented 3 different homeowners against your HOA in the past 5 years. She's made a lot of enemies. Can she fine me for hanging laundry on trees? Let me see the bylaws. I emailed them to her, and she was quiet for several minutes while she read. No, your interpretation is correct. What you're doing doesn't violate any specific regulation. If they try to fine you under a general community standards clause, we can fight it. The issue is whether it's worth the cost. What do you mean? HOA litigation is expensive. Even if you're in the right, you're looking at thousands of dollars in legal fees. Most people can't afford that, which is why HOAs often win by default. They can drag things out, rack up your costs, and eventually you settle or give up. What if I'm not alone? What if other homeowners join in? A class action. Rachel sounded interested. That changes things. If you can get enough people with legitimate grievances about selective enforcement and harassment, we might be able to file a broader action against the HOA board for breach of fiduciary duty and abuse of authority. How many people would we need? At least 10, preferably 20 or more. And they'd need documented evidence of unfair treatment, citations, fines, correspondence, a pattern of behavior. I think I can get that. Then let's schedule a meeting. Monday night work for you. Bring anyone who's interested. I spent the rest of Saturday and all of Sunday reaching out to people in the Facebook group. I explained about Rachel Ortega and the possibility of a class action lawsuit. The response was overwhelming. By Sunday night, 37 people had confirmed they'd attend Monday's meeting. Monday morning, my phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Everett, this is Brenda Patterson." I almost hung up. "What do you want?" "I'm calling to offer one final opportunity to resolve this situation amicably." Her voice was tight, controlled. "If you remove the laundry from your trees and issue a written apology for your behavior at the board meeting, we'll waive all fines and move forward with no further action." An apology? For what exactly? For inciting disruption, disrespecting the board, and creating a hostile environment within our community. I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Brenda, you tried to have me arrested for vandalism on Friday. You've harassed me since I moved in, and you want me to apologize." I informed the police of a legitimate suspect in an ongoing investigation. That's not harassment. It's a false report. I have alibi evidence that proves I was home. You accused me out of spite. I did no such thing, but I can see you're determined to be difficult. Fine. The board will begin fining you $100 per day starting Wednesday. If you don't pay, we'll place a lien on your property. Eventually, we can force a sale to recover the debt. Try it. I've got a lawyer, and she's very interested in your pattern of selective enforcement and abuse of authority. You can't afford to fight the HOA in court. No one can. We have insurance and deep pockets. You'll go broke long before we give in. Maybe. Or maybe I'm not alone anymore. Ever think of that? Silence. Then, in a voice stripped of pretense, "You're destroying this community." "No, Brenda, I'm trying to save it from you." She hung up. That evening, Rachel Ortega's office conference room was packed. 29 people had shown up, many bringing boxes of documents. Citations, fines, correspondence, photos of alleged violations. Rachel's paralegal helped organize everything while Rachel herself took notes and asked questions. The stories were worse than I'd imagined. One elderly couple had been fined into bankruptcy over a tree they couldn't afford to trim. A single father had received threatening letters about his lawn while going through a custody battle. A woman with mobility issues had been cited for not bringing her trash cans in within 2 hours of pickup, even though she physically struggled to move them. "This is more than enough for a case," Rachel said finally. "What we have here is a clear pattern of selective enforcement, retaliatory fines, and breach of fiduciary duty. The HOA board, particularly the president, has been using their authority to target and punish specific homeowners while ignoring violations from favored residents." "What are our chances?" Margaret Chen asked. "Good. Nevada courts have been cracking down on abusive HOA practices in recent years. There's legislation limiting fine amounts and procedures. If we can show the board acted in bad faith, we can potentially get all these fines reversed and force policy changes." "What about Brenda specifically?" someone asked. "Can we remove her?" "That requires a vote of homeowners." "But if we win this lawsuit, it might motivate people to actually show up and vote." The biggest problem with HOA tyranny is apathy. When only 10% of homeowners vote, small groups of busybodies take over. We spent 2 more hours organizing the case, signing retainer agreements and planning strategy. By the time I left at 9 p.m., I felt like we'd accomplished something real. Tuesday, things got weird. I came home from work to find my trees bare. Someone had removed all my laundry while I was gone. Not stolen it, removed it. Everything was folded neatly and stacked in a plastic bin on my porch. I immediately checked my security cameras. The footage showed a landscaping truck pulling up at 2 p.m. 3 workers had gotten out and carefully removed every piece of laundry from every tree, folding it as they went. The truck had Desert Bloom Landscaping printed on the side, along with a phone number. Desert Bloom was the company the HOA used for common area maintenance. Someone had sent the HOA's landscapers to my house to remove my laundry. I called Donald Winters immediately. "Did the HOA send landscapers to my house?" "What? No. Why would we do that?" "Because someone did." The HOA's landscaping company was on my property removing laundry from my trees at 2 this afternoon. "That wasn't authorized by the board. Let me make some calls." He called back 20 minutes later. Brenda contacted Desert Bloom directly and told them to remove the laundry. She said it was an emergency maintenance issue and that the board had approved it. They're saying she authorized payment from the HOA account. So she sent people onto my property without permission, had them remove my belongings and paid for it with HOA funds. That's theft and misuse of community money. I'll bring this to the board. "Oliver, this is getting out of control. Brenda's not acting rationally." "Then the board needs to remove her. You have that authority, don't you?" "It's complicated." She has allies on the board, and removing a president requires cause and a formal process. She just stole my laundry using HOA money. How much more cause do you need? Wednesday morning, I filed a police report for trespassing and theft. The police were less interested this time, suggesting it was a civil matter since nothing was damaged and everything had been returned. I also filed a complaint with the Nevada Real Estate Division, which oversees HOAs in the state. Then I went shopping. I hit every thrift store in Henderson, buying clothes I didn't need. Shirts, pants, dresses, whatever they had. I spent $200 on laundry that I immediately took home and washed. By Wednesday afternoon, my trees were fuller than ever. I'd more than doubled the amount of laundry on display. If Brenda wanted to keep removing it, she'd have to keep spending HOA money. I was going to make this as expensive and public as possible. The Facebook group had grown to over 100 members, including people from other HOA communities in Henderson who'd heard about our fight and wanted to share their own stories. Someone set up a GoFundMe to help cover legal expenses. Within 24 hours, it had raised $3,000. Thursday, the local news showed up. A reporter from Clothesline TV, the CBS affiliate in Las Vegas, knocked on my door at 5 p.m. "Mr. Everett, I'm Jennifer Martinez with Channel 8 News. We've been following the social media posts about your dispute with your HOA. Would you be willing to talk on camera? I'd always avoided attention. Public speaking made me nervous, but this had gone beyond my personal comfort." "Sure," I said. "What do you want to know?" They filmed my tree-mounted laundry display, interviewed me about the clothesline prohibition and the subsequent escalation, and got reactions from neighbors. Margaret Chen agreed to speak on camera about her own experiences. George declined, but he stood in the background of several shots, arms crossed, looking quietly supportive. When they asked to interview Brenda, she refused and threatened to call the police if they didn't leave her property. That footage made it into the segment too. The piece aired Friday evening on the 6 o'clock news. They framed it as "Local Man Fights Back Against HOA Overreach," complete with shots of my laundry waving in the breeze like colorful flags of rebellion. The reporter noted that Nevada had recently passed laws to reform HOA practices after years of complaints about abusive boards. The segment went viral. By Saturday morning, it had been picked up by national news outlets, shared on Reddit, and turned into memes. My house became a minor tourist attraction, with people driving by to take photos of the laundry trees. Brenda's response was to double down. Saturday afternoon, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney demanding I remove all laundry from my trees within 48 hours or face immediate daily fines of $500. The letter claimed my actions constituted creating a public nuisance and bringing disrepute to the community. I forwarded the letter to Rachel Ortega, who responded with her own letter to the HOA's attorney. Her letter pointed out that the HOA had no legal basis for the fines, that the board president had already committed trespassing and misappropriation of funds, and that we were preparing a lawsuit that would seek damages for harassment and selective enforcement. The legal volleys had begun. Sunday was quiet, but it felt like the eye of a storm. I spent the day preparing for what I knew was coming. I organized all my documentation, backed up my security footage to multiple locations, and mentally prepared for a long fight. Monday morning, I received an email from Donald Winters. "Emergency board meeting tonight, 7 p.m. Board members only. We'll update you afterward." He called me at 9:30 p.m. We voted to suspend Brenda from her duties as president pending an investigation into financial irregularities. I'm assuming temporary leadership of the board. What changed? The news coverage, the national attention, the fundraiser. The real estate division contacted us about the complaint you filed. Our liability insurance carrier is concerned about the potential lawsuit. And frankly, several board members are fed up with Brenda's behavior. This has become too much. Is she gone for good? That depends on what the investigation finds, but she can't act in any official capacity right now. And Oliver. The board is voting Wednesday night on repealing the clothesline prohibition. I can't promise it'll pass, but I'm recommending it. This whole situation has been absurd from the start. Tuesday, Brenda escalated in a way I didn't see coming. I received a letter from an attorney. I didn't recognize threatening personal legal action against me for defamation and harassment. The letter claimed I'd made false statements about her to the media and incited a campaign of harassment that had resulted in threatening messages and property damage to her home. I hadn't made any false statements. Everything I'd told the reporter was factually accurate and backed by documentation. And I certainly hadn't encouraged anyone to harass her. But the letter demanded I issue a public apology and pay $50,000 in damages or face a personal lawsuit. Rachel Ortega laughed when I showed her the letter. This is desperation. She's trying to intimidate you into backing down. These claims are baseless. Don't respond. Let her sue if she wants. We'll counterclaim and add it to the case against the HOA. Wednesday night's HOA board meeting was packed again. Word had spread about the vote on the clothesline prohibition, and people showed up to make their voices heard. The meeting room was over capacity, with people standing in the back and doorway. Donald Winters ran the meeting efficiently. He acknowledged the ongoing disputes, outlined the board's investigation into procedural and financial issues, and called for public comment on the proposed bylaw amendment. Speaker after speaker stood up in support of repealing the clothesline ban. Environmental concerns, cost savings, personal freedom. Only 3 people spoke against it, all friends of Brenda's who argued about property values and community aesthetics. The vote was 4-1 in favor of repeal. One of Brenda's allies on the board was the sole opposition. The clothesline prohibition was officially removed from the Riverside Meadows HOA bylaws. I could have stopped there. I'd won. I could legally hang laundry however I wanted, but this was bigger than clotheslines now. I appreciate the board's action, I said when Donald asked if I had anything to add. But I'm not dropping the lawsuit. Too many people in this community have been harassed and financially damaged by years of selective enforcement and abuse of power. We need accountability, not just policy changes. The room erupted in applause. Donald nodded slowly. I understand. The board will cooperate fully with any legal proceedings. We want to make things right. Brenda didn't attend the meeting, but I had no illusions that she was done fighting. Thursday morning, I was proven right. I woke to police cars in front of my house again. This time, they had a warrant. Mr. Everett, we need to search your property, the detective explained. We've received a report that you've been conducting surveillance of your neighbors without their knowledge or consent, which may violate Nevada wiretapping and privacy laws. I have security cameras on my own house pointed at my own property, I said. That's completely legal. The complaint suggests your cameras are positioned to capture neighbors' yards and windows. We need to verify what they're recording. I let them in and showed them my camera setup. Both cameras were clearly pointed at my own property, my front yard and backyard, respectively. They didn't capture anything beyond my property line except incidental background. The detective reviewed the positioning and footage. These are fine. They're clearly for security of your own property. Who filed the complaint? I can guess. Miss Patterson indicated you'd been using surveillance to gather information for your lawsuit and that you'd violated her privacy. Her house is 3 doors down and not visible from my cameras at all. This is retaliation for the board suspending her and voting to change the bylaws. The detective closed his notebook. "For what it's worth, I believe you, but we have to follow up on complaints. My advice: document everything. Every interaction, every letter, every complaint. If she's filing false reports, that's a crime, but we need a pattern to prove it." After they left, I was done playing defense. I called Rachel Ortega. "I want to add a personal claim against Brenda Patterson for harassment, filing false police reports, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Can we do that?" "Yes. And given this latest incident, we have grounds for a restraining order too. She's engaging in a pattern of behavior clearly meant to harass and intimidate you." We filed the paperwork Friday morning. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday. In the meantime, Brenda was ordered to have no contact with me and to stay at least 100 yards away from my property. That weekend was the most peaceful I'd experienced in weeks. No letters, no police visits, no confrontations. I actually took my laundry down from the trees, washed it properly, and hung it on a brand new clothesline I'd installed in my backyard. Legal, proper, and satisfying. The lawsuit moved forward. Rachel had organized the plaintiffs into a solid case showing years of selective enforcement, financial irregularities, and abuse of authority. We had spreadsheets, documentation, testimony, and legal precedent. The HOA's insurance carrier pushed for settlement, not wanting to go to trial with such damning evidence. Negotiations took 3 weeks. In the end, the settlement included full refund of all fines imposed by the HOA over the past 5 years when similar violations by other homeowners had gone unenforced. That amounted to over $60,000 distributed among 27 families. Mandatory reform of HOA enforcement procedures, including a formal appeals process, requirement for photo evidence of violations, and consistent application of all rules to all homeowners, payment of all legal fees for the plaintiffs. Removal of Brenda Patterson from the HOA board permanently, with a prohibition on holding any future HOA leadership position. Personal payment by Brenda of $10,000 to me specifically for harassment and filing false reports. She fought it. She wanted to go to trial. But her own attorney advised her that she'd lose badly and potentially face criminal charges for the false police reports and misappropriation of HOA funds. She accepted the settlement, but the anger in her eyes during the signing made it clear she'd never forgive any of us. The restraining order hearing happened anyway. The judge reviewed the evidence, the pattern of behavior, the police reports, and the settlement agreement. He issued a permanent restraining order keeping Brenda at least 100 yards from me at all times. Given that we lived in the same neighborhood, this effectively required one of us to move. She listed her house 2 weeks later. It sold in 9 days. The housing market in Henderson was hot, and her place was well maintained. I watched the moving truck pull away from her house on a Saturday morning in late April. I didn't feel triumphant. I mostly felt tired. The neighborhood changed after she left. The new HOA board, led by Donald Winters with Margaret Chen as vice president, implemented the reformed enforcement procedures and actively worked to repair relationships with homeowners. Fines dropped by 80%. Community participation increased. The Facebook group transitioned from complaint forum to actual community building, organizing neighborhood barbecues and a kids' Halloween event. My dryer got fixed in early March, about a week after the settlement was finalized. I still use the clothesline most of the time, though. It saved money, and honestly, clothes dried in Nevada sunshine smelled better than anything from a machine. George from next door started joining me for coffee on Saturday mornings. He'd bring pastries from a local bakery, and we'd sit on my porch and talk about nothing important. He told me stories about his wife Sarah and how she'd fought similar battles with the previous HOA board. She would have liked seeing Brenda dethroned, he said. By summer, the whole incident had faded into neighborhood legend. New residents heard the story and asked to see the trees where I'd hung all the laundry. Someone even created a small plaque as a joke, calling my house the birthplace of the Riverside Meadows Rebellion. I didn't put it up, but I kept it in my garage. The lawsuit settlement funded several improvements to community amenities that had been neglected. The pool got properly heated. The playground equipment was updated. The community center got a fresh coat of paint, covering the graffiti that had been used to frame me months earlier. Nobody ever figured out who actually spray painted those insults. Privately, I suspected it was someone Brenda had victimized over the years, but I had no proof and didn't care to investigate. Some things could just be left unresolved. My ex-wife called out of the blue in June. She'd seen the news story that had gone viral and wanted to know if I was okay. It was a strange conversation. She apologized for how things had ended, said I seemed different now, more confident. I thanked her and told her I was doing fine. We didn't have much else to say to each other. That part of my life was over, and I'd made peace with it. Rachel Ortega and I stayed in touch. She used our case as an example in presentations about HOA reform and actually got invited to speak to the Nevada legislature about strengthening homeowner protections. Some of the reforms we'd implemented in Riverside Meadows through the settlement became models for proposed state legislation. I dated a woman named Jennifer for a few months, someone I met at the neighborhood barbecue in July. She thought the whole laundry rebellion story was hilarious and admitted it was partly why she wanted to go out with me. It didn't work out long term, but we stayed friends. She still lives 2 streets over with her teenage daughter. By September, Henderson started cooling down from the brutal summer heat. I spent a weekend painting my front door a deep blue color I'd always liked. Nobody complained. The HOA bylaws now allowed any color that wasn't neon or reflective. And even if someone had complained, the new enforcement procedures would have required a warning, evidence of actual harm to property values, and a fair hearing. The days of arbitrary fines were over. I installed solar panels in October. They'd been on my wish list since buying the house, but I'd been hesitant given the HOA's history of denying solar applications. The new board approved my permit in 3 days. My electricity bill dropped by 60%. Environmentally friendly and cost-effective, exactly what Brenda had claimed would hurt property values. The holidays came. The neighborhood association organized a decoration contest, completely voluntary with no fines for non-participation. I hung some simple string lights and put a wreath on my door. George went all out with a blow-up Santa and light-up reindeer. Margaret Chen's house looked like Christmas had exploded on it in the best possible way. We all walked around together on Christmas Eve, drinking hot chocolate despite the 60-degree weather and admiring the displays. In January, we got a new neighbor in Brenda's old house. His name was Marcus, a software engineer who'd moved from California for a job in Las Vegas. When I introduced myself, I gave him the short version of the neighborhood's recent history. He laughed and said he'd deliberately avoided California HOAs because they were notorious for overreach, only to discover Nevada had the same problems. But he appreciated the reforms we'd fought for. March brought the annual HOA board elections. For the first time in anyone's memory, there were more candidates than open positions. Multiple families wanted to be involved to make sure the improvements stuck. Over 40% of homeowners voted, double the previous record. All the reform-minded candidates won. Rachel Ortega called me that month with interesting news. The Nevada legislature had passed 2 bills reforming HOA practices statewide, including limits on fine amounts, mandatory appeals processes, and stronger penalties for board members who abused their authority. Our case had been cited multiple times during committee hearings as an example of why reform was needed. "You started something," Rachel told me. "This is going to help thousands of homeowners across the state." I hadn't set out to start a movement. I just wanted to dry my laundry without getting fined. But sometimes standing up to bullies creates ripples you don't expect. By April, a full year after the whole mess had started, I found myself in a strange position. People occasionally recognized me at the grocery store or gas station, thanks to that news segment going viral. Someone had turned it into a TikTok meme that resurfaced every few months. I was Laundry Tree Guy, a minor internet celebrity for fighting HOA tyranny. It was weird but not entirely unpleasant. A couple of people bought me beers at a local bar, thanking me for inspiring them to push back against their own HOA problems. One woman showed me photos of her successful fight to keep chickens in her backyard, despite HOA prohibitions. Another guy had organized his neighborhood to vote out their entire board after years of mismanagement. George's health declined that spring. Lung cancer, aggressive and caught too late. He'd been a smoker for 40 years before quitting a decade earlier, but the damage was done. I visited him in hospice in early May. He was barely conscious, but when I told him who I was, he squeezed my hand. "Sarah would have liked you," he whispered. "You remind me of her. She never backed down either." He died 3 days later. The funeral was well attended, his kids and grandkids flying in from around the country. I learned he'd been a civil rights activist in his youth, participating in lunch counter sit-ins and voter registration drives in Mississippi in the 1960s. Fighting petty tyrants in an HOA must have seemed minor by comparison, but he'd brought the same spirit of principled resistance to it. His house sold to a young family with 3 kids who immediately filled the yard with bikes and toys and noise. George would have approved. He told me once that neighborhoods needed kids and chaos to feel alive. Summer arrived again, bringing 100-degree heat that made Henderson feel like living inside an oven. My solar panels worked overtime, and my clothesline got regular use. Sometimes I still hung shirts on the tree branches, not out of necessity but as a reminder. A reminder that rules should serve people, not control them. That communities work best when everyone has a voice. That standing up to bullies, even over something as minor as laundry, matters. The neighborhood had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The HOA still existed, still enforced reasonable rules about maintenance and safety, but the culture had shifted. People weren't afraid anymore. When someone got a citation, they could appeal it without fear of retaliation. When rules needed changing, they could propose amendments and actually get them considered. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional and fair. I never saw or heard from Brenda Patterson again. According to the Neighborhood Gossip Network, she'd moved to Summerlin, an affluent area of Las Vegas, and bought a condo in a high-rise with no HOA. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. She'd spent years wielding HOA power to control others, then chose to live somewhere without those restrictions. My life returned to something approaching normal. Work, home, friends, hobbies. I took up hiking, exploring the desert trails around Henderson and Boulder City. The vastness and emptiness of the Mojave had a way of putting petty disputes into perspective. Out there, surrounded by ancient rock formations and endless sky, HOA drama seemed absurd. But the experience had changed me. I was more willing to speak up now, to question authority, to push back against unfairness. I'd learned that institutions, even small ones like neighborhood associations, derive their power from people's willingness to comply. When enough people say no, when they organize and fight back, change becomes possible. The local news did a follow-up piece in June, 1 year after the original story aired. They interviewed me, Donald Winters, and several other residents about the reforms and their impact. The reporter asked if I had any regrets about how things unfolded. I thought about it carefully before answering. I regret that it took so long for people to speak up. I regret that some families suffered financial hardship from unfair fines before we fixed the system. But I don't regret hanging laundry on my trees. Sometimes you have to make noise to be heard. The piece ended with footage of my backyard clothesline, sheets and towels waving in the desert breeze. Simple, mundane, and completely legal. It should never have been controversial. But it became the symbol of a fight against petty tyranny, proof that ordinary people could push back against systems that didn't serve them. As July turned to August, I marked the anniversary of installing that first clothesline, the one that started everything. It seemed worth acknowledging. I threw a small party, inviting neighbors and friends. We grilled burgers, drank beer, and laughed about the absurdity of the previous year. Someone hung a banner between two of my trees. 1 year of laundry freedom. Margaret Chen gave a mock-serious speech thanking me for my service to the community. Donald Winters presented me with a ridiculous trophy, a plastic Oscar-style statue spray painted gold with a tiny clothespin glued to the top. Everyone clapped and cheered. It was silly and heartfelt, and exactly the kind of community celebration Brenda would have hated. We were building something different now. A neighborhood where people actually knew their neighbors, where disputes got resolved through conversation instead of citations, where rules existed to help rather than punish. It wasn't revolutionary. It was just decent and human and functional. But compared to what we'd had, it felt like a triumph. As the party wound down and people headed home, I stood in my backyard looking at my trees. They were just trees, ordinary desert trees struggling to grow in the Nevada heat. But they'd become symbols of resistance, of fighting back, of refusing to accept arbitrary authority. I took down the banner and folded it carefully. Someday, I'd tell this story to someone who needed to hear it. Someone facing their own HOA nightmare, their own petty tyrant, their own moment of decision about whether to comply or resist. And I'd tell them what I learned. Sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to back down when you're in the right. The laundry on my clothesline dried in the evening air, and I brought it inside as the sun set behind the mountains west of Henderson. Tomorrow I'd wash more clothes and hang them again, exercising the right I'd fought for. Not because I had to prove anything anymore, but because it made sense and saved energy and smelled like sunshine. That was enough. Sometimes winning isn't about grand gestures or total victory. Sometimes it's just about being able to dry your laundry in peace, without fear of arbitrary punishment from people who think rules exist to enforce their preferences rather than serve the community. I'd hung laundry on every tree to make a point, and the point had been made. The clothesline was enough now. But those trees would always remind me of what was possible when ordinary people decided they'd had enough and fought back. And if another Brenda Patterson ever showed up in Riverside Meadows trying to return to the old ways, well, I still had all those clothes from the thrift store. The trees were always there, ready for another display if necessary. But I didn't think it would be necessary. We'd built something better, and people tend to protect what they've built together. The neighborhood had learned its power, and that lesson wasn't easily forgotten. The sun finished setting, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. I locked my door and settled in for the evening, content with my quiet house and ordinary life. The fight was over. The laundry was clean. The trees stood ready. And tomorrow would be just another day in Henderson, Nevada, where a man could hang his clothes wherever he wanted without fear of fines or harassment. Sometimes that's all the victory you need.